welcome to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. We are on site today at a question and answer session with Billy Bragg about his new book, Roots, Radicals, and Rockers, The History of and the Beginnings of Skiffle, with author and musician Jim Walsh. We are at my favorite bookstore in the Twin Cities, Majors and Quinn, that literally has the best new and used music section in town. I've got a couple $1,000s worth of books I bought here over the years. Billy Bragg, Jim Walsh at Majors and Quinn in Uptown, Minneapolis.
You guys, I've been hanging out with Braggy for a couple of days now, and I can't help but say faith in humanity is at an all-time low, and skepticism about the human race and all the crap that is going on. And then there's Billy Bragg.
The currency of music, not just political music, but all music, the currency of music is empathy. And for those kids to be able to sing those songs and feel empathy for those sharecroppers, it's just one illustration of how music works. And the times that we live in now, when there seems to be a war on empathy, where anybody who expresses any compassion for anybody else suddenly finds themselves, accused of political correctness or virtue signaling or any other shit designed to police the limits of social change. Those of us who make music or any art, any culture, we should be ramping up the empathy. We should be ramping out.
Which brings us to your new book. Billy's got a great new book coming out in the UK in next month, right? And in September in the States, it's called The Three Dimensions of Freedom. And I've read it, and it's a searing little blast of what we need. Very much connecting the dots between these times that we're living through and this idea of accountability. You can't just tweet hate and our societies don't react. But that is what's happening, and that's the world we live in now. But this book is great, and it'll be out in September here. And talk about that. What, you sat down to write it, how long ago, and what was the mission?
Well, one of the jobs of being a songwriter is you're trying to join the dots in an interesting way. I mean, not just a songwriter, so as anybody who makes any art. Only justification you have really is to offer a different perspective of something, whether it's a poem or a painting or whatever, a building. So as a songwriter, we all can see the same stars, but it's how you join the dots in those stars that makes a difference. You can offer someone a different perspective in that. And for a while now, it's not just been since Trump and Brexit, I've felt that the thing that's missing in the middle of the donut, the hole in the middle of the donut, is accountability. And that, particularly with regard to neoliberalism, the idea that the free market will solve everybody's problems, is a way of politicians of escaping the accountability that is the key aspect of democratic process. And over the last 40 years, since 79 in my country, when Thatcher was elected, 80 in your country, when Reagan was elected, there's been more of a push, even with Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, to use the market as the deciding factor in making policy, particularly social policy. The key engine of neoliberalism, globalization, is of the same nature. It doesn't accept borders. It doesn't accept the jurisdiction of nations to be able to levy taxes. That lack of accountability in itself has led us to a situation where the gap between the rich and the poor in my country and your country is widened and widened and widened. The end result of that is people are angry. They want change. They want their lives to be better. If they are not offered change, they will vote for chaos. Because whatever you felt about Hillary, she wasn't a change candidate. And it worried me a great deal during the election campaign because it just came just after Brexit. And I understood, Jim and I had this conversation. We understood how Brexit had legitimised race hate in our country. And I felt very much that that was the real threat that you had to face. Never mind what policies Trump might have, his victory would done what we know it's done. So on one level, I'm trying to write about that accountability, but at a more micro level, how we deal with one another in our social discourse, particularly in terms of social media. And the basic idea that it's a polemic. It's an essay. It's a little thin book. It's 17,000 words. It's not, it's a 90-minute read. But the basis of it is the idea that freedom, or particularly freedom of speech, is a one-dimensional notion of freedom. And that the ability to say whatever you want, whenever you want, to whomever you want, with no comeback, is not in any way a definition of what freedom constitutes. Because if it were, then there would be no greater shining paragon of freedom than your president's Twitter feed. What's missing, there are two other crucial components of freedom. Liberty, let's call it liberty, the right to express your opinion, empowers you as an individual. It's empowering. And that's why it's the most crucial aspect of freedom. The second part of freedom, though, is reciprocal. It's your duty to respect other people's right to express their opinion. Equality, that's the second dimension of freedom. But the third dimension is both empowering and reciprocal, because it's accountability. It gives you the power to hold others to account, but you also have to reciprocate by making yourself accountable, by accepting that your actions will have consequences. Because, we have a big problem, it's not a problem, but it's a battle going on, I know in the United States here as well, with people who believe that any form of challenge to their point of view is censorship. And these are people who can't tell the difference between censorship and consequences. Actions have consequences,
The equivalent here is our Congresswoman, Ilhan Omar.
Of course.
The President of the United States tweets that she's un-American and has no knowledge of 9/11, and that's code and that's tropes for Islamophobia coming from the White House, and there's no consequence.
I mean, during the presidential debates, when Trump was challenged live on TV with about his behaviour towards women, he turned around and said, I don't think America has time for political correctness.
Define political correctness.
Political correctness doesn't actually exist. There's no party out there with a political correctness program. There are no intellectuals defining the ideology of political correctness. It's a trope. It's a complete trope that speaks of the powerlessness of those who are utilising it as a means of trying to police the limits of social change. It's very useful for politicians who use political correctness, because it refocuses the anger of reactionaries. There's reactionaries everywhere. Reactionaries against the minority rather than against the system that has put those reactionaries in the situation they find. We need parameters. Those of us old enough to remember, this is America, so maybe not, but in Europe, in the 20th century, late 20th century, when we talked about socialism, we had parameters around which we understood what we were talking about. Now we live in a completely post-ideological world. And so there's no parameters anymore. We need parameters around our discourse and around our politics. And those, we can talk about ideology all night if you like, but before you get to ideology, you've got to get those parameters, those foundations on which you build these ideas. And freedom as an idea is a powerful idea, but they don't really want free speech, they want free reign. They want to be able to say whatever they say with no challenge. And when they're challenged by women, by people of colour, by people from the LGBT community, when they're challenged, they, you know, all of a sudden they're falling back on, you know, Aristotle and J.S. Mill and all those kind of guys. But that whole point of reference, the thing about John Stuart Mill and his views on freedom was, he was never been the victim of a Twitter pylon. Freedom of speech gives you the right to express your opinion. It doesn't give you the right to abuse people. You know? It's not about stopping people from speaking. It's about policing the tone of the debate. And that's what these guys, and they mostly are guys, I'm afraid, can't stand. The idea that they're going to be called out if they make comments that are beyond the pale. If they say ridiculous things like there's no such thing as Islamophobia, they're going to be called out because they're mostly academics. They're coming from a culture that, you know, they've learned the tenets of it. And if people are going to come in and say, oh, we have to have women's studies, and we have to have African American studies, we have to have LGBT studies, their whole basis of getting through the doors, their whole sense of entitlement is going to be right up the creek because they're going to have to relearn everything again. So of course they're going to go out there and defend it. While we're arguing about who has the right to speak, and that's what political correctness is, it's an argument about who has the right to speak. While we're arguing over that, authoritarianism is growing around the world. And authoritarianism is what you get if you have freedom of speech and no equality and no accountability. That's where authoritarian comes with. And that, we've got to deal with that. It's not just in the United States of America, it's around the world. And then the other thing we have to deal with is climate change. That's all about accountability. It's about individual accountability, it's about national accountability, it's about international accountability. And on top of that, we have also got to deal with how we ensure that the algorithms that drive so much of the information we receive are not biased in one way or the other. Where is accountability in the digital sphere? These three things, authoritarianism, the climate, and algorithms, these are the big challenges that we face about the way the world will be in the next 50 years. And if we lose sight of equality, and we lose sight of accountability, we're going to just end up with whoever's got the loudest voice and the most followers on Twitter, whoever's got the bully pulpit, whoever can bend the Constitution to their will, and it will be all about will. The will of the people, in inverted commas. There's another thing there's no such thing as. You know, accountability is our best, equality and accountability together are our best shields. And equality is a given. It's a given. Accountability, though, accountability is absolutely crucial because it's accountability that gives freedom its teeth. You know, equality gives it freedom its scope, which is crucial, absolutely crucial. But accountability is the fulcrum on which we can reformulate the balance of power. Without it, democracy is a sham.
The book is really helpful that way, and it'll only be here in September, but you know, we swim through these waters now, and you want answers. What do we do? One word, accountability, is something you keep coming back to in the book. Billy Bragg, let's do questions. Rob.
Curious things I read lately is that Rupert Murdoch thing in the New York Times. Did you see that?
I didn't.
He went to Australia. They gave him a
Oh yeah, Rupert Murdoch. Yeah. He's another guy who doesn't want any accountability.
and we don't get to vote for him.
Yeah.
He just has so much power that we have no control.
Well, that's what I said. It's the A word. I would just say there are no answers in the book. It's not about answers. It's about recognizing what's missing and trying to work towards that. The sad news from the ideological days of the 1980s is there are no utopias. There is no socialist paradise. What there is, though, is a road in that general direction. And all you can hope for is to be, in your generation, making a pathway down that road to that better world. And that's the most we can hope for. We will never get to that promised land. Because the next generation will come along and they'll say, this is shit, we're going to change this. But at the moment, in my country and your country, we're on the wrong path. We're going the wrong direction. We're going back a ways from that. And all I'm trying to do with the book is just to shine a bit of light in the direction The role of the artist is to be a signpost rather than a leader. That's the gig that we're on. Go on, mate.
So why do you think, so Lonnie Donegan created all these waves of British kids to pick up the guitar and eventually create rock bands. How come that didn't happen in the United States with Elvis to that?
Why didn't skiffle happen in the United States of America with Elvis? I think you have to understand the years of rationing in my country and the hunger for young people for something that was their own. In many ways, popular culture in the United States of America was all-encompassing. And I think that for these kids were trying to escape the war, they were trying to escape rationing, and they were looking for something to build a bridge to the future. And that's what skiffle was. By learning to play the guitar, they were looking ahead to all the songs, the skiffle songs, were all about trains. Get on the train and take them away. You know, Rock Iron Line, Last Train to San Fernando, Freight Train, they're the big three hits by Donegan, by Chas McDavitt, and by Johnny Duncan. And they were trying to escape that boring kind of bit of post-war Britain, the bomb sites, the drabness of it.
You talked about skiffle and the birth and everything else in the British Isles, etc. We had something going on here, also Un-American Activities Investigations of McCarthy era, the Kefauver investigation of literature regarding comic books and all this kind of stuff in the early 50s. Do you have any thoughts about whether that stunted anything like skiffle happening here?
Well, one of the very interesting things about the House Un-American Activities Investigations was, as a result of that, Alan Lomax left the United States of America, came to Europe ostensibly to make a collection of folk music for Columbia, and was actually in London when Rock Island Line got into the charts, which is kind of weird because he was with, you know, he was there more or less with Leadbelly, and all of a sudden there's this song in the charts. And when he bought the record, it said on the record that the song was written by Lonnie Donegan. But Donegan had no idea who wrote it, you know, it's a folk song. Also, at the same time, for similar reasons, Peggy Seeger was in London. She knew Leadbelly. You know, she had a song that she'd learned from an African-American maid, a song that Elizabeth Cotton used to play to her when she was a child, called Freight Train. And when she played that in the coffee houses, the British kids listening to her didn't imagine for a moment that she learned it off someone who wrote it. They just assumed it was a folk song. So one of the skiffle bands recorded it and had a huge hit with it, and a hit in America with it, Freight Train. And so Libba Cotton heard her own song on the radio. Charles Seeger, Peggy's father, who was, you know, working with her, they went and sued the record company before it. You know, so and the other thing is also in London when Rock Iron got into the charts was Ramblin' Jack Elliott. So you got, you know, someone with, because there's a lot of Woody songs in skiffle as well. Lonnie Donegan was the first person to record Woody Guthrie songs and get them in the charts in the UK.
My question is, why Leadbelly? Why not John Hurt? Why not Glenn London? Was there a particular personal connection to Leadbelly by Lonnie Donegan?
I'll tell you what, in the basement, in Grosvenor Square in London, your embassy stands on the far side of the square, but across the other side of the square there was a building that Eisenhower used during the war as his headquarters. And after the war, it became the headquarters of the United States Information Service, which was a American government-funded program to spread the American culture. Most of it was books. You could go and borrow books from the library, but in the basement there was a record library, and the record library consisted of all of the recordings of the Library of Congress. So that includes square dancing records, you know, accordion records from the Tex-Mex border, but it also includes Leadbelly, Muddy Waters at Parchment Farm, and a lot of Leadbelly records. And one of the complaints that the skifflers had is that they would go there to borrow the record and the record wouldn't be there, the Leadbelly record, and they would look in the book and it would say that this record had been lent to a Tony Donegan, Lonnie's first name, and hadn't been returned. Because Donegan worked out that the Americans can get these records anywhere. They get them. You know, if I steal this record, they'll just buy another one. And I went and did a talk about this, about Skiff at the Library of Congress, which is on their website if you want to watch it. And I forgot to mention this, which is really bad because I don't use notes. I just riff from it. That's really, really bad. But while I was there, Stephen Winnick, who works for the Folklore Centre, he did some research and he found in the US Information Service archives a memo about this, not about Lonnie, but about people who were stealing the records. And it was felt that this was merely another way of promoting American culture. If that was the aim, to promote American culture, this was a good way to do it and not to worry about it. So thank you to the largesse of American taxpayers. You should rightly take credit for Leadbelly. And I think that those other artists that you spoke of, and I'm not absolutely sure about this, but I believe that they came quite a long time later in the revival. That those, people like Mississippi John Hurt were rediscovered in the 60s, weren't they? So I think the thing about...
Because of the release of the Harry Smith and
Yeah.
American folk music,
Yeah.
which I would argue is what you were saying. That was the event in 1952 that
Yeah.
with slow burn through our culture that launched it.
But you remember Leadbelly was the first American vernacular artist ever to be studied by the Lomaxes. Because the Lomaxes, everybody else who was studying American folk music at the time was relying on recording what was played, either with a machine or the musical notation. In Leadbelly, the Lomaxes had someone who could come on stage at a lecture and perform the songs as thought. And it may be, they would encourage Leadbelly to talk about the actions that went with the songs. That when he was singing these songs in the field, what happened? If you listen to some of the early records, you talk about, on the Chain Gang, when he was on the Chain Gang. Of course, Rock Island Line is not a work song. It's a call and response song that originally was a glee song for the Rock Island Line in Arkansas. Yes, mate.
Well, first thing I just want to say is I'm 22, so I'm probably one of the younger people here, and I love your music.
Thank you very much.
And two of the biggest musicians that probably formed my political views were you and Phil Oakes. Mm-hmm. And my question is, have you ever met or played with Christy Moore?
I have. The very first time I went to Australia, he was on the same tour routing as me, although he's playing much bigger venues, and we spent a few fun evenings sitting in bars and places, swapping stories and swapping songs. Yeah, I have a huge amount of respect for him.
I love Christy Moore's music. And of course his political views too.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Does he get over here much? Does he come to Minneapolis? A great deal, Christy Moore?
I don't think so. I mean, I almost saw him when I was in Dublin last time, but I just couldn't afford the tickets at the time, so.
That's the trouble with the Rhino circuit. The Rhino circuit, have you ever done the Rhino circuit?
No.
We charge a lot.
One of the things I wonder about in the book is a lot of the Lomaxes were studying a lot of the Appalachian music, which is a fusion of African American, but also a lot of Scots Irish, and it draws from the UK originally, but maybe back to the 1700s. So I wondered a little bit if there was something in what came back that was almost just resonating.
This is very true, yeah. We're just talking, yeah. Well, we're talking about the stew ball effect that I outlined earlier when I was talking, that's how it happened. We were just, the question was about the ability of songs coming, from the UK coming down through Appalachia into the fields, into field workers and back around. But, all that kind of stuff came back around and back around. Look at the first Beatles album, it's all Motown songs. Because we share a language, our ability to take each other's culture and repurpose it for our own use is, it's kind of one of the great things about sharing a culture in that way. And it works both ways, These songs come and go, and we're the same within our own island, what we borrow from the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots, what they borrow from us. That's the great thing about culture. We have a saying in folk music, what goes around comes around. Yes, mate.
Eddie Cochran's from Albert Lea, Minnesota,
Yep.
and I just wonder, were you around when Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent came over, like in the late 50s, early 60s?
It's in the book, though. I address it in the book, in the Because what happens is Eddie Cochran's death in Britain in 1960 is the kind of brings to an end really the first rock and roll burst. You know, when Eddie dies, Elvis is in the army, Buddy Holly has already died, Little Richard has given up rock and roll for God, Jerry Lee's in prison. Oh, no, Chuck Berry's in prison, and Jerry Lee's married a 12-year-old. So kind of what happens is with the death and Gene Vincent's now, you know, his body is smashed to bits.
Right.
And there's a pause there for maybe in my country for maybe 2 years where the music from before skiffle kind of reasserts itself, and there comes a kind of sort of horrible sort of I don't know what to call it really, but a sort of a
Syrupy?
you could say that, yeah. A kind of Bobby V kind of period of stuff. Until one day, in 1962, people turn on the radio and a sound comes out of the radio that nobody's ever heard before. And it blows everybody's mind, and it only lasts for 2 minutes, and it's called Please Please Me. You know? Don't tell me no shit about Love Me Do. I could have written Love Me Do. Love Me Do sounded like Bobby V. Please Please Me didn't sound like anything anybody had ever heard before, and it's still done. It's like a chainsaw. And the turnaround in the middle of the verses, the turnaround where they go, dang, 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 that is skiffle. That is skiffle.
Last question. I got to ask this. You know, socialism of the heart, I keep faith in you, empathy, accountability. You're a very inspiring dude. What do you get from us? What do you get from people who come, you know, and...
Oh, it's easy. That's easy. That's easy. The biggest enemy of all of us who want to make the world a better place is not capitalism or conservatism, it's cynicism. And not the cynicism of Rupert Murdoch and Fox News and those kind of people. That's their gig, they say. The cynicism that is our greatest enemy is our own cynicism. Our own sense that nothing will ever change and nobody cares about this stuff and it's all a waste of time. Now when I feel like that, when I get angry, I'll write songs, because I'm not really a political songwriter, I just write songs about things that make me angry. I write my song, I'll come out in the dark with you lot at a gig, I'll play my song, everybody claps, I don't feel half so bad about it. I feel like I'm not the only person who cares about this. And when I see you, as I will at the Fine Line tomorrow night, a room full of, you know, maybe 300, 400 people singing There Is Power in the Union and punching the air at the end there, my activism gets recharged. And my job is to recharge the activism of everybody in that room. Because they may live in an environment where they're marginalised, their views aren't broadly accepted by people, and they also need to feel that they're not alone. And they need to see everybody else in the room singing along to Power in the Union. And they need to go out and charge, because by Christ, when I come off stage tomorrow night, my activism will be recharged. And that's how music does what it's supposed to do. It can't change the world. Trust me, I've tried. But what it can do is to make you feel that you're not the only person in the world who feels bad. It's back to that empathy thing, you know. There is a solidarity in song. It's the reason why music is cheap as chips, but people will still come to gigs even on the Rhino circuit. It's because you can get something at a gig you can't get anywhere outside of a soccer match or church, and that is communion. That is communion. You get there, you're in the audience, your favourite singer's on stage, they're singing your favourite song, 500 other people are singing it as well. Whatever emotions you've attached to that song are accepted by everybody. You're in a place among people where you're together. That solidarity, that communion, you can't get that online. Thank God, because it will keep me coming to Minneapolis tonight.
We just saw a great question and answer with Mr. Billy Bragg. He's got a great book out called The Roots, Radicals and Rockers, The History of Skiffle. It was a really great question and answer, very inspiring. Billy, of course, is a brilliant musician, songwriter, and great political mind.